Price talks to the movers and shakers in the film business. The Jan Price Show, all about movies.
You're listening to the Jan Price Show, all about movies, and today my guest is Alexis Gambis, and we're going to be talking about his new film, which is very fascinating, called Son of Monarchs. Welcome to the show, Alexis.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Thanks for having me in the film and the monarch butterflies as well.
Well, you're welcome. I live, as I said, in Carmel, California, and right down the road, less than 5 minutes away, is Pacific Grove, which is known as the butterfly capital of California. So, and we have a monarch butterfly sanctuary here. So I was very fascinated by your film. I'm sure you're very aware of that.
I become an expert. I become one of the like benefits of making this film is that now people ask me all about monarch butterflies. So
I'm sure.
My other role is like talk about the film and talk about monarchs. So.
Well, you're not only a filmmaker, but you are a biologist too. So that's kind of an interesting combination. So which started first, filmmaking or becoming a biologist or being a biologist?
Definitely pursued a career in the sciences, but I come from a background, both my dad's a painter, my mom's a filmmaker. So I grew up kind of in that world of, my dad kind of exhibiting his work and my mom making films. But I was always interested in biology, and I was always interested in kind of the aesthetics of biology, working at a microscope, understanding life. So it's very hard to kind of decide what came first, but I definitely, in order for me to start expressing myself as a filmmaker, I think my life as a biologist really informed a lot of how I work now as a filmmaker. And I don't only make science films or films that deal with science, but I think my approach to life and my approach to filmmaking is informed by my life. My first life as a biologist. So
well, this movie is a personal journey, I understand. So I want to get more into it. So I would like our audience to know a little bit about Son of Monarchs and what it's about, because you co-wrote it too. You actually were the writer of it. You wrote and directed it.
I wrote it. The story is about a Mexican scientist that lives in New York who works on butterflies, and he learns about tragic news in his family, and he has to return home to Mexico and kind of confront his past and his family. And it's a story about somebody trying to figure out where he belongs and where he wants to go, and kind of identifying with the monarch butterfly as an alter ego, as kind of a chaperone in his own life. It's a film about immigration, about identity, about trying to figure out our roots, and it's kind of like a character study about who we are.
It's a really unique film in the way that you filmed it, because it does have that feel of a documentary as well as a narrative film. So it's very unique in that, and then also combining your interest in biology and spirituality. So it's a deeply it's got many layers to it, which makes it fascinating to watch. So tell me a little bit so for you, how did the story come about? Because as I said, you wrote it as well as directed it. So for you, what was it about this that sparked the creative juices to have you write this film?
Well, it's always difficult to know, the kind of the origins of a film. But I think my fascination with animals and what animals can tell, because, when I was a scientist, I also worked with animals and worked with insects, and in a way kind of, and on a scientific level, you look at animals to understand ourselves, to understand human disease, human development, how we behave. So most of my films start out with an obsession with an insect or an animal as a metaphor to speak about the human condition, right? And so the monarch butterfly was an insect that was around, especially in the prior administration, because it was associated to this idea of migration, this idea of being able to migrate freely across borders, the idea that the monarch butterflies migrate from Canada through the U.S., arrive in Mexico. Of course, as in Carmel, there are many monarchs that don't migrate because the weather is perfect for them to stay where they are. But many of them have to leave because of the inclement weather and trying to find warmer weather. And so I was interested in that idea of kind of migration, and as a way to also explore human migration and human immigration. And so that was definitely one aspect that got me interested in making the film. And then also the idea that the butterfly also represented this aspect of spirituality, it represents the souls of the ancestors that come back to Mexico. In science, the butterfly is also studied for its color, its patterns. Why does it look the way it looks? And so there we enter into conversations about race and about color and about why we look the way we look. And so the monarch is interesting because it's kind of like this, as the name says, it's like a regal. It's the monarch, right? It's like it's this amazing insect that is one of the longest migrations of any animal, and it can escape predators. It's obviously affected by climate change and everything else, but it still kind of migrates despite everything around it. So
I think my house has butterflies all over. There's all kinds of butterfly images throughout my home, and I think so many people relate to butterflies. Obviously, just their journey. This coming out of that cocoon and becoming this magnificent, beautiful, colorful butterfly that obviously can go anywhere, as you say. And I think so many people relate to that. That's what we want to aspire to be, and that's the spirituality part of your movie, which is so again incredibly very thoughtful, very different kind of aspect, and that's what makes your film so unique. Talk a little bit about, and go back to climate change. We're beginning to lose our butterflies. I know here we are the butterfly sanctuary because of the climate change and the many things that are going on in our environment. We're beginning to lose them, as we are the bees. So it's very important that we look at how we can save these, save the planet.
Yeah. It's a very paradoxical relationship we have with, with butterflies and bees, is that we love them. We have them on our coffee mugs. We have them on our screensavers. Many of us have milkweed and cultivate, but at the same time, we don't really pay attention. The fact that this is one of the most endangered species, and because it's an insect, we sometimes forget. And it's on. There's been a lot of conversations about monarchs being on the endangered. It's not being on the Endangered Species Act. If they're not sufficiently. They don't have that status of people caring that much about them to some extent. But what's also amazing is that it involves cooperation from many countries, right? It involves, cooperation in this case, between Canada, the US, and Mexico. So if you have pesticides or roundups, if you have Monsanto killing the milkweed, or if you have deforestation, or of course, the broader picture of climate change, it's affected. The reality is we're about to lose our monarch butterflies. It's like an 80% decrease in the last 5 years. So we're on the verge of losing these creatures. And so as much as we love them and we're enamored by them, we're also destroying them. So it's very sad.
It is very sad. It is very sad. So, hopefully, again, this film will bring some recognition to that. And we'll also perhaps
not to be a downer here, but it's the reality. I don't oftentimes speak about these issues up front because I feel like people will sort of get it, through the characters, because I'm not here to preach a discourse about these things, and that's not really the goal of my films. But I'm hoping that people will realize as they watch this that we live in a very kind of fragilized planet, and and we have to take care of ourselves and our environment and our ecosystem. So
yes, very definitely, and there's more and more awareness, and that seems to be the number one priority for many people. As with this administration, that climate change is, if we don't start doing something now immediately, we're not going to have much of a planet left for the future generations. And so it's really important that everybody as an individual do their part to help with this, with climate change as much as we can. But that's another topic too. So this film, because of the characters in it, it is about transformation, obviously. But let's talk about the brothers themselves and their journey and what they go through. What happened to them, why they're, just their journey. Let's talk a little bit about that, Alexis.
Yeah, I think, the idea of a lot of my films come from a lot of research and investigation and spending time there. So I learned a lot about the situation back in Michoacán, in this town of Angangueo, and the mining industry. This is like an old mining town. So there's a lot of conversations about how the mining industry is very important for the economy. And some people want to reopen the mine. Of course, that affects the forest because there's a lot of contamination from the mining industry. But it's not like a black and white situation. You can't just come in there and say, I want to we need to protect the forest. Of course, we need to do all those things, but there are people that have lives and situations. So the idea of the brother, and then there was a very big flood a few years ago, said to have been caused by one of the mines that filled up with water and exploded and killed a lot of people. So all of these stories, I kind of carry them through characters, right? And so the brother represents the brother that kind of stayed behind, the brother that works in the mine, the brother that had to go through the trauma of kind of the flood because, his younger brother was too young. And so I thought it would be interesting to kind of have him encompass all of the things that happened in this town, but also, this bond that they had as kids that has been fractured because of the other brother leaving. And so I wanted a lot of that relationship to be kind of unspoken. Like there's a lot of just tension between them because of their different lifestyles and what they've decided to do. And at the end of the film, without saying much, there's kind of like a sense that, there's some sort of beginning of an understanding and reconciliation happening. But that's what I do oftentimes, is that the characters in my films embody point of views and perspectives. Like I'm not telling anybody, that this is kind of the preferred way of thinking about things, but Mendel is a biologist, very much focused on wanting to protect this habitat. His brother works in the mining industry and has to feed his family. And so, everybody has their way of seeing things. So.
And that's, so many of the issues, again, we're going back to what's going on in the world today, that same kind of, situation of...
It's complex.
Yeah,
it's complex. We always say, like, let's fight climate change and let's do this and that. But, it's when you start speaking to people, there's a lot of layers and it's just very hard. And of course, that town is suffering because there's a lot of narco trafficking. There's the butterfly tourism has been affected. Of course, the pandemic hasn't helped. They live off butterfly tourism. I mean, it's not easy. And so it's just the reality of like, how do you survive? It's all, that's ultimately what the film is about, is how does one survive in, whether you're in New York or whether you're in Mexico and or whether you're a monarch butterfly.
Right. And the juxtaposition between New York and Mexico is very fascinating. Talk about that a little bit, why you decided to have this character be in New York, of all places.
Well, because I live in New York, and so it definitely was kind of like very close to my experience. It's a bit of an autobiographical film. I was a scientist in New York, coping with family tragedy and kind of trying to figure, I'm from France and Venezuela. My mom is from Venezuela and I live in New York. So definitely have all these identities. I'm also like a scientist, but also interested in art. So there's a lot going on in trying to figure out how this all fits together. But in terms of the story, I was really interested in kind of breaking this tradition of like films that are about arriving to the US or, like unidirectional. I wanted us to feel that you go back and forth. You're just going back and forth constantly between Mexico and New York, because that's just the reality of many people, that they belong in many places. And as much as it's more of a privileged type of migration, it is the reality of many people that we live and we exist in many places. And these are all part of who we are. And so I wanted in the editing and in the structure to float, like a butterfly going back and forth, which is what happens with monarch butterflies. They go back and forth between these places, and they sleep, they go back, they come, it's like cyclical. And so that was the goal in how I kind of structured and thought about the film.
And then you show a lot of, in the film, it's graphic, as the work of the Manuel as a biologist, actually, dissecting the butterflies. So talk about that process too, because there's a lot of interesting photography in that, and for the public to learn a little bit more about what he does and how it affects him too, because what he does also has an effect on him. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, when you're a scientist and you're a biologist and like an evolutionary biologist, you spend a good part of your day looking through a microscope. That's part of the reality that you live in. You look out of the microscope and then you maybe walk through New York City, but a lot of that world of like dissection and looking at structures, and whether it's a chrysalis or a larva or butterfly patterns. And so it's just part of his his world. It's part of that world. And so as a filmmaker, I have to kind of give justice to that world. And I like showing that world. And a lot of those images are shot by me, actually, after we shoot principal photography, because microscopes and kind of getting lost in scale and dimension is part of it. There's also something very gore and very kind of like ripping something apart, which is what scientists do. They have to kind of dissect, they have to peel layers. And so I wanted us to take time, and that's why the film begins with that, because peeling a chrysalis is like peeling through memory, trying to understand why do we have the structures that we have, or how we kind of develop as creatures. And so I wanted us to have moments in the film where you come back to those images, because it's almost like you're with him. It's actually a POV shot. You're looking through his own eyes, and I think those are really powerful moments of him trying to understand the work that he does, his memory, spirituality. Of course, every time you see those images, you sometimes hear the grandmother. You sometimes like start getting flashbacks. So those are moments where I kind of jump into other dimensions as well.
So you weaved in the storyline a little bit of politics, of things that were going on during that time period, which I thought was interesting too. Although you don't dwell on that, that's there. That's the backdrop of a lot of what's going on. When did you film this, and when did you decide to put that layer into this film, the political layer?
Well, again, the political layer has to come from the characters, right? So I'm not here to speak about that. Actually, we took a lot of it out. Actually, there was more political aspects to the film, but we realized that we didn't need it because it was just kind of embedded in the character and who they were. And so, it comes out in like these little conversations. Also, political and environmental discourse actually also comes out, in kind of these little subtle moments where he's with his uncle and they talk about deforestation. And I think that when things are said in passing, they're much stronger because people are left with it, because it's just kind of the world that we live in. It's like, what's happening with your president? And he says, he's not my president. And there's not much more needs to be said. And also, these people don't really want to talk about these things. It's kind of mentioned, and then they speak about their childhood and speak about it's been a long time since I haven't seen you, but it's kind of luring in the background, like thinking about the border and thinking about the idea of, he also talks to Sarah about maybe we could fly over borders if we had wings. And so that's my way of kind of bringing in the political nature. And I think it leaves an imprint on you because it's kind of just like, it's there, people know it's there. And I don't need to like start talking about, policy or, having like titles saying like the monarch butterflies are endangered. It's all there. It's all carried and weighed in by the characters that are living those things. So that's kind of like my take on that. Yeah, well, and also like the idea of him screaming, when he's at the ritual, all of this is just like all of it coming out, his way of rebelling against the world that we live in, all that.
Well, that's what I love about this film, because it's subtle. It's not hitting you over the head exactly. So many films like Twitter hit you over the head with these issues. And there's, lots of, as I said, layers to this film. Let's talk a little bit about the casting of this movie. How did you cast it? And let's talk about the actors. Because the little boy, I thought was the little boy in the beginning part of the film who's playing Manuel's character when he was little. I just thought he was absolutely adorable. So can you talk a little bit about how you cast it?
Yeah, I love casting. I love that aspect of, I think more than anything, the two things that I love the most is writing and also just working with actors, and because a lot of the actors in my films are non-actors. There's a lot of people that have never acted before, but I love mixing, non-actors with actors. Many of the people in the town are these are all people from there that are participating in the film and are from the town. The kids, there was definitely the first one that was kind of cast in the film is Tenoch, right? The scientist. I met him through a common friend. I was living in Mexico making these short films, and he was shooting Narcos, and he had been in, he's a relatively kind of big actor, and so he was very interested in playing a different role as a scientist and had a fascination with science. And we just kind of spoke about science. And then I invited him to go to the Butterfly Sanctuary because we were showing some of my short films. And that's how he got involved a year before, while I was writing the film. And then, it's kind of like like you build, right? So once you know him, then you kind of look for the kids, and they're involved in choosing their own versions as children. And I love working with children, especially doing improvisational work, especially putting them in situations where they're in nature. And so that's kind of how I found these characters, was just kind of talking to them and seeing how they would, what do they think about butterflies, and just, rather than having script, that's kind of my approach to it. And then you keep building and building, and many of them are not actors and some of them are, and it's like a very rich exchange that happens between all of these people. And it's wonderful. Casting process is something that I really enjoy.
How was it filming the underwater scenes with both of those young actors?
Well, the underwater is only with the adult actor. Yeah, he the underwater was because the kids are screaming.
Yeah.
The underwater was shot in a pool in Mexico City because I wanted him to kind of have trauma of this flood that happened to him as a kid, and I definitely didn't put the kids underwater, but they did some voiceover where it's kind of like reliving this trauma of being in a flood. Those are moments that are very important for me because they deal with kind of the subconscious, the trauma, and that's a big part of the film, is like, how do you visualize and how do you create like a soundscape and visualize both trauma and dreams. Is something that I explore a lot in my films, and my work is very much in the realm of magical realism, and so I'm very interested in kind of elevating those worlds. And so it was fun. It's not easy to shoot underwater or cover a scientist with butterflies in bed, but it's part of like my surrealism and kind of getting into those worlds, because I feel like science and spirituality lend themselves really well to kind of exploring magical realism.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. You won the Alfred P. Sloan Featured Film Prize at Sundance this year. How was that for you? That's a huge prize. Yeah,
well, it's definitely very close to home because it's basically what I do, right? I'm a biologist and a filmmaker, so there's no better distinction, out of Sundance Film Festival. Also being in the next section, which is about kind of these new emerging voices, and then winning the Sloan Prize. I'm, very humbled. What's beautiful about the prize also is that it's given by a jury of scientists and filmmakers. So there are scientists that are there. One girl that is in this film called Coded Bias is part of it. I don't know if you ever saw that movie Coded Bias, but it's about how algorithms are biased to certain types of people. And then there's a film. So I love that it's not only like filmmakers, but scientists that are involved in that decision. And it's a beautiful prize. I mean, I've followed the Sloan Foundation for a while. I've been kind of involved in some aspects of it, and I'm just extremely, blessed to be able to receive that award. And then we went on to win the Grand Jury Prize at Seattle. So it's wonderful. It's very exciting. And this film is going to be premiering on HBO Max on November 2nd. And that's very exciting, too, to be on HBO Max. So I wish you much success with Son of Monarchs. It's coming out in the movie theaters on Friday. Yes. Actually, here in New York City. So we have like 2 weeks in New York, Austin, LA, Chicago, San Francisco. So if people want to watch it on the big screen, they have 2 weeks, and then HBO Max on November 2nd. Yeah, wonderful. I wish you much success with Son of Monarchs and with your career. And it's a really unique, beautiful film with many layers. And everybody seek out Son of Monarchs. Thank you so much for being on the show, Alexi. It's been a pleasure talking with you. Thanks for having me. If you've missed any of the Jan Price shows all about movies, you can go to my website, thejanpriceshow.com, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. We're on the iHeart Podcast Network, Apple Play, Google Play, Apple Music, iTunes, and please go to our YouTube channel and subscribe and follow us at Jan Price on Instagram and Twitter. Thank you all for listening.
Jan Price talks to the movers and shakers in the film business. The Jan Price Show, all about movies.